The Crooked Epic. 1. In. 1. The Inn of Maniacal Madness. 3. Ted. The Lake. 3A. 2. Jacob, you're too funny. Gregory, this is my friend Jacob. Alex pointed at Jacob, who was wearing a dark green sporting uniform and had been hiding low in a bush to the side of the trail. Sorry, I thought I was going to scare Teddy. Jacob snickered at Ted after Benjamin was back up. Are you Gregory? I am sorry, but it was still pretty funny. Good sport, Benjamin. How's your arm, Al? Oh, it doesn't hurt as much as it did the first day. Yeah, this is Gregory. Alex changed the subject. Did you bring the bait? Where is it? Yep, it's back under the bushes. I'll grab it up. Jacob hustled back to join them as Gregory had turned back down the path to keep walking while Benjamin and Ted gathered the fishing pole and tackle boxes. Are you okay, Ben? Trying to lift his spirits, Ted gave him a grin while he asked, and Benjamin nodded, smiling widely and blushing a little. They brushed themselves off and wasted no time getting back onto the path which led to Horace Lake, hurrying behind the older three. They all walked through the calm and shaded forest along the path. Benjamin and Ted did the least amount of speaking, and they listened to the stories that Gregory told about his time in secondary school. Alex and Jacob, too, participated in the conversations less, but led the way, and they were making good time as a party of 5 now. Jacob believed in the fish's slowing of their feeding in the later afternoon, and he pushed them to a pace which allowed them arrival at the lake well before noon. Jacob had also brought his own net and creel and a nice Shakespeare rod set. Alex and Ted both had Shakespeare reels which were attached to Bristol rods. Finally, the stretching density of trees in front of them began to lighten up as clear sky peeked through from atop the forest and around the higher branches and leaves. The gentle buzzing of flying insects grew steadily in the warm air, and the thinning out of large trunks was replaced by smaller bushes and thickets, brambles and marshes. The path became muddy for bits of the walk as it swerved around ponds, swamps, and drained streams. They gained speed as a group until Ted saw the path's opening and the dirt surrounding the access point to the lake. They hopped over protruding roots and around slick and mossy rocks through fields of decomposing timber colored with fungi. Spring had melted winter's snow against slowly disintegrating stumps, sticks, and logs, and washed away or dissolved into trickling and dried stream beds. Finally, an outline of the lake became scenically visible. Their anxious movements slowed to a creeping plod to disguise themselves and soften the noise of their steps from the fish, birds, and animals nearby. Further on to the lake, as their acumen was equally distributed between each member of their party, and they began slowing into a search of the various outlying positions which they might claim for their own, their mutual perspicacity to remain unnoticed and unheard was eventually broken by Jacob's disruption from the group's synchronized conduct. As Jacob haphazardly thrust his tackle box onto a large stone ledge and the metal box jingled, the trances were adjusted into focus and study of the gear. Jacob set the bait tin on the ground while examining his exposed line and knots, sinker positioning, and began tugging on his hook. In turn, they looked through their tackles for bobbers and sinkers, hooks and lures as they organized and formed plans. At this point, it occurred to Ted that they would be separating from each other to make room and space between their casts so the lines would not cross. Additionally, Ted remembered the sporting magazines their father owned, and Alex had shown him where men had often used more than one line and cast multiple times at different angles. Still, nothing like this was available for the 5 young friends on the lake that day. Yet it all reminded Ted of the safety concern Mrs. Wilson had voiced. Flashbacking thoughts about the disturbing chaos of the day before returned to his head, including memories of the cave chase and the crazy man. Terrible anxiety that Ted refused to share with anybody was subconsciously unnerving him as he glanced around at his brother and their friends. His hand began to tremble as he tried to tie a new hook. The loss of control was not completely unconcealable nor personally alarming, but Ted fumbled with the line, twice missing the tiny metal eye. When he feebly dropped the hook to the ground, he could feel someone watching him and looked up to see Gregory looking concerned. Alex caught on quickly to Ted's mild frustration, too, and after Alex gave his fishing net a finishing tug, he approached to lend a hand. Jacob passed the old tobacco bait tin to Gregory, while Benjamin waited his turn to dig through and find a worm. Alex set his rig down and motioned to Ted with his hand to pass him the rod and line. He used his knees and thighs to sturdily secure the rig between his legs, letting the handle rest on the rocky ground below while Ted gave the small hook over to him. "Here you go," he said. "Watch what I do. I'll show you a trick." Quickly, Alex threaded the line through the hole and held the hook up in the air by the two sides of the line so everybody could see. Twist it a few times after you thread it. Spin it around about 3 times and finish the fishing knot off. This way, the hook won't fall out of your hand again while you're tying it up, and also, it will help you tighten without breaking the line. Jacob interjected, "Yeah, now grab a worm and twist him around a couple of times too, so you attach him to the hook more than once. That way, your worm doesn't fall off it when you cast or when he hits the water." Jacob walked over with the bait tin and handed it to Alex, who grinned and handed the rig and tin to Ted. Gregory and Benjamin walked down to the lakeshore while Ted stooped over the rocky surface and set the bait tin down. Wrestling through the dirt, Ted felt the cold, slimy, and wet mud around the worms, and as fast as he could, he fumblingly found a big one. Pulling his hand out of the smelly tobacco tin, the nightcrawler wrapped itself around Ted's hand and wriggled. "You got it okay?" asked Alex. Ted nodded up at him with his eyebrows raised as the worm whipped back and forth against his finger. "Well, I'm going to move down to the water. Cover it up tight before you get it back to Jacob." Jacob waited without bait on his hook, and Ted looked down at the hook swinging on his line. Ted grabbed the line with his left hand and fouled it down to the hook, which he pinched with his thumb and forefinger while he steadied it to the worm. Suddenly, as he looked down at the slimy, writhing worm, he felt a sharp pain and a stinging sensation in his right finger. When he looked again, the nasty worm appeared to be biting him. Gasping, he threw the worm down on the rocks and let go of his pole, which crashed down. "What's going on?" Jacob looked over at Ted with a frown. "I thought it bit me." The pain had almost caused Ted to fall over. "Worms don't bite, do they?" No, no way. Hey, that's weird. There's no way a worm has teeth or can bite. Are you okay, Ted?" Jacob started to walk over to him as Ted scoured the ground for the worm. The worm was an average-looking nightcrawler, and even as he looked skeptically and leaned over to see it up close, Ted did not understand how it could have bitten him. "I got it, don't worry," he muttered under his breath. Ted was a little ashamed of his naive remarks. "I've never heard of a nightcrawler that bites. It was probably something else." Before making the scene too dramatic, Ted picked up the worm, got it onto the hook fast, and adjusted it. Strange. With his hand above the reel, Ted dangled the bait in front of himself, and he observed it, struggling desperately, hooked, helpless, but it seemed like a totally average worm. So while recovering from his embarrassing delusion, Ted tightened the lid back on the tin and handed the bait to Jacob. "All right, I'm going down there. See you later. Hopefully the fish still bite your crazy worm," Jacob commented, but Ted had already turned his back to him and faced the lake. Ted began to descend to the lake with the tackle box and net in his other hand. Gregory had been the first to the shore and had cast his line out the furthest, twice as far as Benjamin. Gregory had walked just left of the path, maybe 5 feet, and Benjamin was about 40 feet south beyond him. Alex was north 10 yards, and as Ted walked down the path between them, Ted deliberated which way he should turn and whom he would be wisest to stay nearby. Initially, he thought that he might go over toward his brother, having just remembered the precautionary speeches of both their guardians, but he slowed down his walk to watch as Jacob burst past him and down to the right toward Alex. Alex moved down the shoreline to compensate for Jacob's entry to the lineup, and then positioned himself for the cast. Even with his arm's malady, he could draw a decent enough line out. Seeing Jacob stand with his bait tin stationed between the elder two comforted Ted that he would be safe and within reach of supplies. So Ted finally went south about 20 feet past Benjamin. This put Ted at the edge of a corner of their small bay on the lake's northeast side. When he came within 15 feet of the shore, he set down his fishing net and stood up to survey the water on the lake, the depth and debris in it, and the lines which everyone else had cast. There were only a few waterlogged branches closer to the shore, no fallen trees nor rocks, and it looked like the deep water extended around and to the left and the right past Alex in the bay. It gave Ted feelings of serenity and calmness. The shade from the hanging limbs above him reflected across the lake into the blue of the sky, and gray wisps of clouds spread clear across the lake. Ripples fell onto the water's edge, and there was not much wind to make waves. 2 dragonflies zipped around and buzzed in the tall, motionless grass to his left, as faint echoes of bullfrogs filled the distilling vapors of the dried shores. The minty smell where the green pine forest met the damp ground before the lake gathered pungency in the heat as the shallow bottom sank into murky brown mud below. A mourning dove cooed far out in the woods to his back, and Ted glanced over his right shoulder to look at Alex and Jacob up near the trail, each waiting patiently for a bite to strike their lines. Alex was not struggling with his one good arm to throw casts into the lake. Gregory stepped up and threw another cast over his shoulder far out into the lake. The sinker smacked with the line, splashing the surface, and Gregory knelt behind some short bushes. Benjamin was somewhere between them out of sight, but Ted saw how his line was still out, twitching and bobbing in the breeze and currents of the waves. With the rod in his right hand, index finger pinching the line, Ted used his left finger to flick the bail on his reel and raised the line over his shoulder to throw out into the water. The sinker and hook splashed far out in the lake, slicing slightly to the right of where he had aimed. Steadying his arm and pulling down the bail, he raised the rod's tip and grabbed the handle with his left hand. There was a lull in the commotion they had made for themselves on the shore, where insect buzz and gulping crash of the tiny waves absorbed the silences between them.